Welcome to Pivot Points, a new series featuring some of the world's most successful women, candidly sharing their stories and insights about how they made it to the top and how you can too. Hosted by Perry Yeatman, a straight-talking global executive and award-winning author who created the career and life of her dreams and now wants to help other ambitious women do the same.
Welcome. This is Perry Yeatman, host of Your Career, Your Terms, Pivot Points. My next guest is someone I first met while I was working for Kraft, and she was the head of the consumer industry group for the World Economic Forum. That was more than a decade ago, and in all the years since we've met, I've continually been impressed by her intelligence, her insights, and very important to her role, her absolute unflappability. She works with a veritable who's who in business, government, and civil society, uniting them all to tackle some of the world's toughest problems, from food security to renewable energy. But she wasn't always a nonprofit leader. The first 20 years of her career were actually spent at Kraft Foods, running multi-billion-dollar businesses for the food giant. Only once she had conquered the business arena did she make the choice not to relocate and instead set her sights on a global nonprofit. And in the decades since she made that transition, she has never looked back. She is a champion for women in business and for multicultural women in particular, sitting on both the boards of Ascent and the Forte Foundation. You may not know her name, but you probably should. Please join me in welcoming our next guest, Sarita Nayyar, Managing Director of the World Economic Forum US. Welcome, Sarita.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
I'm so glad you could be here, particularly after I know what a tough month January always is when you work at the World Economic Forum. So I've told listeners a little bit about where you are, but could you help us understand what is it you think that really launched you? What was the job and how did you land it?
Oh, well, I guess for me, it's sort of like I think of my career in two phases. The first phase was very much about being in business and working for General Foods and Kraft Foods and, as you know, in the food industry, a lot of mergers. But in the end, the first part of my career was very much about, going up the ladder through the brand management cycle or path, I should say. And for 20 years, I did that, and I was on the business side and leading businesses and teams and cross-industry teams. And that was a very fun and exciting time. And then I would say that the second phase for me, which was a significant shift from moving away from just purely business, but moving into something that was very closely linked to business, was my career at the World Economic Forum. And as we speak, I'm delighted to say that I will be in another month, have been with the forum 10 years. And as we were sort of talking, I just came back from Davos, which was my 10th meeting in Davos.
That's a lot. So you had kind of two major parts to your career. I think that's a good way to say it. And actually, it's one of the things that I think is so amazing about you. You're both a big thinker and a global operator, right? I mean, you've got this combination of being able to, because the challenge is a lot of people can think big thoughts, but they can't make things happen, or they can make things happen, but they can't think big thoughts. And it seems to me that somehow you've been able to blend these two capabilities, which is really special. What was it that you think made you, first, why did General Foods pick you? And then why do you think the World Economic Forum picked you? What was it about you that made these potential opportunities come to life?
Well, General Foods, which was a long time ago, so
I understand. We won't date ourselves.
I know. But I think General Foods for me was very much like what it was graduating from the University of Michigan with an MBA degree, sort of a starting point for me in the U.S., although I have to say that I had worked in India before for 3 years, so it wasn't my first role, but it was a very important role to me. I was clear that I wanted to do brand management. It was clear to me that I wanted to be in the CPG sector. So, being clear on that front sort of helped me focus my search process, so to speak. I guess I was lucky enough to, have interviews with some of the key companies at that time. And General Foods was the one where I guess I cut it till the last. At that point, what was important to me was that I would have the opportunity to start a career in a company where I would be able to learn really solid basics around marketing, around brand management, and there were multiple organizations really that would have provided that opportunity, and General Foods was one of them. And I was delighted when I, had that opportunity sort of made available to me.
Were there a lot of women getting picked at that time? And do you think that being a woman from India, how did that play in, do you feel? Like, do you think it was actually a help or was it a hindrance? Or did you feel like General Foods, they just didn't even really notice?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and it's a question I've been asked often. Now, I don't know if I was very naive at that age, but I was extremely focused in sort of my career search, and I don't think at that point I ever felt any sort of a discrimination either way, either in favor or against because of my being Indian, because I got interviews in multiple places. So I'm not sure that had much of a bearing in the decision making. Now, I will say, though, at the time that I started at General Foods, I think, we were probably equal number of men and women, or maybe a bit more on men. I certainly didn't feel that there were enough women at that time when I started. But I will say that very quickly there was a shift in the whole marketplace, so to speak, and it was, I would say like within 5 years of my starting at General Foods, there was a change in the marketplace, significant growth in, the financial sector and investment banking, etc. And then we did reach a stage at one point where I recall being part of the recruitment process, and one of our objectives was that we need to be able to, through the recruitment process, identify some men, because most people who were applying to CPG brand management opportunities were women, since the majority of the men were either going to investment banking or consulting after that.
Interesting. I never knew that. Very interesting. Was General Foods or Kraft, were they involved in the World Economic Forum? Is that how you got there? Or how did you transition from being, a kind of a 20-year corporate person into a very different type of environment?
I would like to say that it was significant thinking on my part, but the reality is it wasn't. It was just a turn of events. At Kraft Foods, I had 20 years of really, really great experience, multiple opportunities, having worked in different categories, having done, line management for the most part, but then also done a significant amount of work on the strategy side. I was responsible for the integration of Nabisco into Kraft. That was a very
that was a big thing.
A big learning experience on that merger. And then it was one of those things that happens, I suppose, where it's like, okay, my next career move would have to be that I had to physically relocate, because by then Kraft Foods had sort of moved the headquarters to Chicago. And so if I were going to continue on this career path, I needed to move to Chicago. And, it was the first time in my life, actually, at that point, for the first time, I was faced by a decision on where, am I going to pursue my professional path, or do I need to bring my personal situation into the mix? And it was the very first time in my life that I had to make that decision, and I was in a situation where the rest of my family was not willing to relocate to Chicago. And so I had to decide, and obviously or not obviously, I chose family. But it was the first time that I decided that I was not going to then pursue my career any further with Kraft Foods, and I would look for options. So I left Kraft at that time. I took a year off, and it was a very valuable year, because after having worked nonstop for 20 years, it gave me time to sort of reflect on everything I had learned, everything I had done, and what I wanted to do going forward. And I realized at that point that I had been very North America focused for 20 years. I had not really had an opportunity to expose myself to international experiences, and it was the point in time where, the world was becoming extremely global from international. It was all global, one flat world. It was the start of the internet and all that. So I was looking for opportunities, though purely in business, and however wanted a bit of an international flair to it. And then the World Economic Forum opportunity came to my attention, and it was really a recruiter who brought up the opportunity. I didn't really know how to think about it, and initially I was unsure. And then I thought, okay, let me try it. As I talked to people at the World Economic Forum, it sounded interesting, and I thought I'll just take it a shot. If it doesn't work out, I would always find something else.
Mm-hmm.
And so here now, 10 years later, I'm still there, so obviously it worked out. But it was, and in fact, you talk about transitions. I guess for me, this was probably the biggest transition. I mean, I did other transitions, obviously, within Kraft, but this for me was truly a major transition in terms of career paths, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And just picking up on the transitions piece, as you made this transition, and you said you were nervous, which is very common, frankly, for even women who have done, women and men, but women more so, who are very capable, have great track records. Even still, we have self-doubt, we wonder. What did you learn from that? What advice could you give to others as they're facing a major transition? Like, did you walk in with a playbook, or did you, just say, hey, I'm just going to listen and learn? Like, how did you approach it in order to be successful?
I think that it was definitely a learning curve, and at least for a year, I would say, I was unsure whether, this was the right choice or not. And I think, when you come from a large multinational organization where everything is so structured and well designed, and you know what your responsibilities are, and you know what other people's responsibilities are, and it's all sort of, and especially when you've done it for a while, then you sort of get comfortable, so it's all very clear. And then you go into an organization which is, not for profit, which I would say was only a partial factor, but still, it's not for profit. It's a much smaller organization. I joined the New York office, and they had just opened it, so it was almost like a startup, I would say. In fact, it's funny, on my first day, I got there, and I was like, okay, can I get some notepads and pen and paper, and where might I get that? And the person who had greeted me that day looked at me with a little sheepishly and said, oh, there's a Staples nearby. I'll just go and get that for you. So this was like,
yeah, that's a big change from Kraft.
Then it's like, yeah, okay. And so then, of course, you get past that, and then you realize, oh my God, there's so much opportunity, and I can do this and I can do that, and this can be better. And then you start working with your team, and you start operating as though they understand what you're saying, because it's so simple, right? I mean, this isn't right, and we'll fix it like this, and this can work like that, and they're just looking at you, staring at what are you talking about? Yeah. So then you sort of realize that, okay, how do you get across the message you're trying to get across? How do you do it in a way that others are comfortable with it, and sort of then you build trust, because they kind of realize that, okay, maybe this is worth trying, and maybe there's some credibility here. So I would say my first year was very much about with the team, trying to understand them, trying to explain what I'm trying to do. And it required a significant, mindset shift in the team. I did in the end have to, change some team members as well. In a way, it was really good to realize that everything doesn't work one way. Mm-hmm. And because this was international also, clients were international, so all of a sudden you're working with different cultures. And I will say, although I think, as a woman of color, I know that there's tremendous opportunity within the U.S. for us to do a lot better. But I felt, my experiences would suggest that actually working with Europe and Asia, etc., that was sort of new for me, because I kind of felt quite comfortable in the U.S., maybe because also in the CPG sector, there were a lot of women leaders, and role models that I had grown up with in Kraft Foods. The senior management was quite extensively women, and so it had been less of an issue. And then all of a sudden, sort of at the peak of my career, I remember one time I wrote to the CEO of a very large European company, and I just said that, that we'd like to come and see him, and so my chairman and I would come to see him. And the reply was that his secretary replied to me saying that he would love to meet the chairman. So it was almost like just because a woman wrote to somebody, then she must be an assistant. And that was to me like, oh, wow, aha moment to realize how I had to operate so that I could, represent myself at the level that I was representing. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So these were interesting experiences, and, different cultures are very different. Also, at the forum, I work a lot with governments as well, which was very, very new for me because obviously coming from business, I didn't know. So early on, I had to learn that too because there are protocols about that and how you refer to them and how you don't refer. Probably, Perry, you've had more experience in that in sort of the roles that you've played over the years. But, as a business leader, you never sort of dealt with that because you never interacted with other players. And similarly, heads of NGOs. So there's no protocol, but it's about how do you build credibility and how do you build trust, because these are individuals that we want to work with and we want them to, realize that we are sort of all trying to work towards similar goals and objectives, and how do we might have different roles in the broader framework, but maybe we have shared goals, and so how do we work together? So I think, there were sort of what I would say differences related to a large organization and a small organization, a multinational structure to an unstructured startup, pure business, extremely professional to, multiple stakeholders. So lots of differences, but obviously, therefore, a really good growth opportunity for me as well.
Yeah, and I think, clearly it worked, but I also think that, I applaud you because I think that we need more, this is just my personal view, but we need more leaders who actually understand all three sectors. Because when you think about the kind of problem, this is how I feel, but when you think about the kind of problems that the world is facing, the only way we kind of sustainably, scalably, and replicably solve these problems is if we have all three sectors, business, government, and civil society at the table. So I think it's great that you've actually taken your business know-how and then gone into a space where you can help bring that and coalesce, a variety of different organizations and all of the sectors together to try and make a difference. So I applaud you for that. So I have a question though, because I want to go back to something you said because it was really interesting to me, and I thought, wow. Okay, you said that you were about 20 years in corporate before you had to make a major choice where you put your family first. And I just want to explore that because I got to tell you, it was a lot less than 20 years before I had to make choices where I had to compromise and put my family first. So tell me about that. What was your support system? Because I know you're married, I know you have kids. How did you work that out such that you really felt you did not have to compromise for 20 years?
Yeah, I know. I must be very blessed. I have to say, and I keep thinking about this a lot because I do, see people around me who have struggled. But I guess I started working for General Foods, Kraft Foods. I guess let's call it Kraft Foods because most of the time
it's so hard.
Kraft
It's like, and now it's Mondelez, and it's like, okay, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And I do recall, though, when I started, I was, at the entry level, but I was a little bit older than others because I had worked before or whatever, and I was quite eager to start a family. And for certain medical reasons, the doctor had also advised me to go ahead and do it soon. And so I was a little bit nervous because everybody was waiting till they got to, their second promotion, the brand manager, product manager level before they got pregnant, and I wasn't there yet. And then I decided I had to do what I had to do, and I was very lucky. I had a boss who I actually confided in and said that, I need to, for medical reasons or whatever, my own biological reasons, I knew to sort of move forward, and she was very supportive, and so there I was pregnant before I got to brand manager. Now, I think overall, though, I have been lucky because my experiences with Kraft Foods were very positive. I never really felt when I was expecting or when I came back from maternity leave that I had suffered anything. I will say, though, I was very focused, so I did return from maternity leave very quickly. I think with my first child, my son, I came back probably less than 8 weeks, somewhere in the 6 to 8 weeks, I don't remember. And my daughter was similar. Like I think I did 6 with my son and 8 with my daughter, so I was very pleased the second time around. But if I had to do it again, I probably would take more time. But at that time, I was very focused, and I knew no difference. So, and then I was lucky. I had, my husband is in the academic field, and he was able to work from home. I was lucky with the daycare that I had, that I could depend on. And my husband absolutely contributed significantly, to the upbringing of the kids and sharing of the responsibilities at home and taking care of them. So it all kind of worked out, I suppose.
That's amazing. Did you, question, when you met him, because I don't actually know the story of how and when you met and everything else, when you met him, did you kind of lay it out? This is what you want. Like, was this his expectation going in, or did, as things evolved in life, he just ended up taking this role?
Yeah, so my husband and I, we met at graduate school in India. We came to the U.S. together, and we came to the U.S. because he decided to do a PhD program. And then once I came here and I had nothing else to do, I also decided that I was in a college campus, so I should use it, and I went and did my MBA. So, no, we were young. We never discussed these things. We planned nothing in life. It just kind of happened. And when things happened, they happened. And I guess I would say that aspect really I learned about him once we had kids. It's not something we had ever proactively discussed.
Okay, then I am going to go with your first statement, which is you were really, really blessed, because sadly for way too many women, it doesn't go that way.
I know. If I had to do it again, I would definitely be checking on it in advance.
Good idea. So when you told your daughter, you said, now, honey, make sure when you pick your spouse, think about this. Right, exactly.
Have a questionnaire ready. Yeah, exactly.
I love that. Okay, so I want to talk now, kind of, you're at the executive level. We often hear that it's more lonely for women at the top, right? It's lonely for everybody at the top, because when the buck stops with you, even though you can have, kind of peers and colleagues and you can be close with people at your office, the truth is you're still the boss. So for women, it's even more so, because, of course, there are just fewer of us at the top. Obviously, you've got an amazingly supportive spouse, and I know your kids actually also adore you, but what is the support system you've been able to create for yourself in terms of who do you go to in terms of doubt? Have you ever had a mentor or a sponsor? And if you did, how did you get those, and how did you maintain those relationships?
This is a good question, and definitely I feel that if there were things that I did feel, definitely felt lonely at the top at many points in time. And intuitively, I'm a more of an introverted person, or at least I was. I'm much more open now than I was before. And it was not that easy for me, actually, to find people that I could sort of lean into. So I would say that, a lot of time it was just me dealing with myself and, talking to myself, thinking about things quite hard and extensively, deeply. I would then once in a while definitely look for people that I could trust and bounce off ideas off of them. There were certainly in Kraft Foods a few people who, were in similar roles. Maybe they were 1 year senior to me or about sort of my time, that I had a lot of faith and trust in, that I sought for advice. And then I would say, I think I have an older sister that I used a lot as a reference point as well. And often I used my husband as well. So I can't point to one person who has served me as a mentor. At different points in time, different people have certainly been extremely helpful, and insightful and supportive. But I wouldn't point to one person that sort of has been throughout my career, I would say.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I'd like to also ask you another question, which, one of the reasons I'm doing these programs is because I'm trying to help provide insights and inspiration to young women, and women actually at all ages, to let them know that everybody who gets to the top is not perfect. You actually said something else that I think is really important that I want to pick up on, which is that you are, kind of by nature an introvert. There are a lot of introverts out there that think being an introvert means they can't be a great leader. And yet, ironically, the 3 female leaders, CEOs, heads of major organizations that I've worked most closely with, were all 3 introverts. So I just wanted to say that actually being an introvert does not mean that you cannot be an outstanding leader. It just means you have to know that about yourself and figure out how do you ensure that you get energy back into the system if you are sapped of energy when you happen to, when you have to be around other people and leading meetings all the time. So I think that I wanted to point that out. I also wanted to say that, clearly none of us are perfect. And I'm hoping that you'll be willing to share, because every woman I know who has succeeded didn't get there without having to go through either some major disappointments or some big failures or some, really inappropriate behavior. And so since it didn't derail your rise to the top, would you be willing to share a story about, someplace where it didn't go, it didn't feel good, it didn't work, and how did you then bounce back? How did you get off the mat and keep going?
If I reflect back on my career, there are certain things, that I would have done differently. In my individual case and experience, I feel like those things fall more in the camp of where I chose the priorities, and some of them I would have chosen maybe differently if I had to redo it. And to me, where they fall are, I was very focused throughout my career to do the best I could for the work that I did and produce the best outcomes and results, and I still believe that is the right thing to do. However, I think that you do have to look at, and I think this becomes more important in tomorrow's world, because frankly, the world tomorrow is going to be very different than the world yesterday where you and I progressed. And because I have the privilege of being able to sort of see, not that anybody knows the future, but have the privilege of talking to people who are working in the area of, what things might look like, it's even more important that women of color invest in ourselves. And that's where I would say, in terms of investment in yourself, is, about being more proactive, about looking for opportunities, about training and experiences, but even more importantly, investing in networks. So it was really very late in my career, starting with the World Economic Forum, did I sort of really realize that I had spent all these years but not significantly invested in building that network. And I don't know, I read this somewhere, I think, where they had listed sort of these 10 things that are important for women to do. And one of them, number 6, was that remember that your network is basically your your net asset. That sort of stuck with me in the head, and I was like, whoa, I wish somebody had told me this 20 years ago.
Yeah, where was that list 25 years ago?
And but really, I think the point about the network that you create and the investment you make in creating those networks, which means you both give and get. And I think that's the one thing I would say would be something that's really important, because I think it comes naturally to some people, but not to others. And then especially it's a little harder for women in general. And it's something that I think we need to, it would be my sort of advice to young people would be to definitely invest in networks. Now I am part of various networks, and I just keep circulating them to every niece and nephew, I have. Of course, many of them don't do much about it, and it's very frustrating because I'm like, okay, I've been there, done that, and you are going to realize it one day, but then you should start early.
I agree. It's so funny you say that. One of the phrases that stuck in my head was, networking is working, right? So that was another one. It's like, this is not optional. And for women, I think it is more about relationships than kind of traditional male networking. Men are very comfortable, a lot of men are very comfortable just walking up and saying, hey, this is what I want to ask from you, right? And it's an ask right off the bat and whatever. I think a lot of women are uncomfortable with that. And so I think that for us, if we think about it more like building a relationship, where, as you say, it's about give and get. It's about actually caring about the other person and what they're doing and how it's working. And I think, it was one of the benefits. First of all, I am an extrovert. This is not a surprise to anyone. So I'm an extrovert. I get energy by being with other people. The second thing is, because I worked in so many countries and for so many different organizations in my career, I don't think I could have possibly have started this initiative if I didn't know so many amazing women who have been, like yourself, very gracious and saying, yes, I'll give you an hour of my time. And I think that it really does matter. The other thing I'd want to stress to listeners is that, despite all of the online applications and everything else, the bottom line is most jobs, most promotions are still gotten through word of mouth. So if people know you and they respect you and they trust you and they like you, these are the things that are going to make the difference in your career. And as big as the world is, boy, it gets really small at the top because you're going to find that it's going to come back around. So, it's worth investing. It's worth building a network that, that is meaningful to you, whatever that may be, personally and professionally. Yep, I agree. Thank you for sharing that. That's actually a great answer. So now I want to go into what we call kind of the fun round. And so these are some questions that are less directly geared maybe towards career advice, but just kind of interesting for other women to hear what senior women are thinking about. And so the first one is, what one word would you use to describe your professional path so far and why?
I guess I would actually say unexpected but successful, and maybe unexpected and successful.
Okay. And unexpected because you didn't plan a lot. You said that. And how do you define success? What has success been to you?
Well, it means many things to me. I mean, I think, you started by talking about the fact that, I came from India and I wasn't born in this country, although I'm a U.S. citizen. But it actually goes back even further because, I am the youngest of 3 daughters. And the only reason my parents in India had a 3rd child was to have a boy.
Mm.
So you can imagine, actually, at the time that I was born, everybody was busy crying. And my mother told me this story from the time I was very young. And although it sounds awful, nobody needs to feel bad for me because it actually was the ultimate joke in our household. It's hard to, I think, envision this, but, at the time that my mother, who is today 91, was having children in India, it was sort of like, a given that you had to have at least one boy, and she had none. And my mother is a physician and worked all her life, believe it or not, at a time when hardly anybody did. And she really worked very hard to make sure that her daughters, all they did was went to school and studied hard so that they could have a career and they could be financially independent. Never once were we told that you need to go cook or, blah, blah, or do any things that are expected of girls. So, when I think back of like my early years, and it was always, and maybe that was part of what drove me because I was always, driven to like prove myself and do well and all that. So if I reflect back on sort of where I started from and where I am today, would I have so many years ago said this is where I would be? Never. Not in a million years. And so, I mean, to me, a lot of that also is under the unexpected umbrella. I think by successful, I mean, it's more, maybe it's satisfied more than successful. To me, it's like I am happy with where I am in my career and my life today. I think I've done things that have, where I have learned a lot. I have done things where I've contributed. I think I have contributed to businesses, to success, to people's success. I've been very fortunate to have these various experiences. And now, in the last 10 years of having the opportunity to, work with people who are coming from Africa or coming from different parts of Asia or Chinese or Latin America, it's to me at least, very satisfying to have the opportunity to be able to learn from different people, to expand my mind, to have different perspectives that I would not have had if it wouldn't be for the opportunity to interact with so many different people from so many different sectors.
No, I completely agree. So I will tell you a quick little story because I was chuckling when you shared about your mom. So I am the middle of 3. 2 surprises, my sister and I, neither one of which was planned. And then 7 years later, the only one they really worked for, my brother. And the only reason we have a 3rd in my family was because they were looking for a boy. And so it was a very similar thing, only we got a boy. But what was funny for me is that I think I turned out to be so different because when my dad, it sounded like your mom actually raised you as 3 boys. So she got the best of both worlds, right? Yeah. She got 3 girls who have all of the kind of caregiving and warmth and wonderfulness of women, if you want to kind of categorize us in some way. And yet they also went off and did their own thing and made their mark in the world and whatever. So I think she did really, really well there. But for my parents, for 6 years, I was the boy because they didn't think they were having any more. So it was like I had to be the boy. And then my brother came along and suddenly they wanted me to be a girl. And I was like,
and it doesn't happen.
Exactly. This is that train has left the station. I'm not going back. So very interesting. So funny.
Yeah. I even joke with my mother as I told her, I said that the best thing that ever happened to the three of us, to her three daughters, is that we didn't have a brother, because if we had a brother, then things would have turned out differently. But I think when you don't have that comparison reference point, then it's, everything is sort of the opportunity that's there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so we're at the last question now, and you can pick either way. There's kind of two questions. One is, if you could do it all again, what advice would you give your younger self? Or, and I think you kind of answered that one because you talked about the networking, but if there's something else you'd like to add, that's great. Or, what's the best piece of career advice you ever received?
I think to me the biggest one would be really about investing in yourself. And I think that could mean different things for different people, right? Because it depends on who you are and what strengths you already have and where you might need to develop further. So to me, that would be the most important thing. And then the second thing I would say is that I'm not sure this is an advice that I got, but this is an advice I would give today, which is that I think going forward, we're looking at a world where it's unlikely that people are going to make careers in one field for an entire lifetime of, 40 years of work. Mm-hmm. What I think is going to be really important is, given that things are going to be changing very fast, so given the pace of change that is going to come about with everything that's technology-driven, that we will need to also find ways to change along with that. So it's about sort of constant learning, mm-hmm. And how future generations will need to be extremely flexible in the way that they develop skill sets and are sort of, it's a constant learning, constant development of skills, and being able to see sort of what's upcoming so that you can be prepared for it before you sort of end up in that situation. So I think that's probably the most important, it seems to me, going forward.
Those are excellent words to end on. I think adaptability, flexibility, constant learning, and you're right. I don't see almost anybody staying. There might be a few. I mean, you may be a dancer. If you're a dancer, you may be a dancer your whole life. But there are a lot of professions. The majority of professions are not going to be one employer, one function, one industry, one geography, and given that any one of those changes would require quite a bit of adaptability, the fact that we might be faced with all of them throughout a career is something that, we really need to build a very different mindset. We need to make change less scary and more something, and we know that's not a girl or a boy thing. That is very much just a human thing, that change is hard. And we need to find cultures and institutions and educational opportunities, et cetera, that make it less scary, because otherwise we're all going to fail. So, excellent. Sarita, I knew it would be interesting. Thank you so much for your time. Listeners, thank you for your time. And I wish you all the best. Hope to see you in New York sometime.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Look forward to seeing you soon.
You've been listening to Pivot Points, a series designed to help ambitious women have the careers and lives of their dreams. To hear more interviews, go to www.yourcareeryourterms.com. And be sure to tell us what you think. If there are topics you'd like covered or people